You might think stress is stress, right? I mean, we all feel it. But what if I told you that stress literally hits men and women differently? It turns out the answer unlocks a really fascinating story about our biology, our brains, and even the history of medicine itself. Let's get into it.
So this whole thing really kicks off right in the doctor's office, with a clinical puzzle that has been around for a very, very long time.
And here's the puzzle. Why are women diagnosed with medically unexplained symptoms, or MUS, so much more often than men? This isn't just a feeling or an anecdote. It's a consistent pattern that shows up in the medical literature, where someone has very real physical symptoms, but there's no clear, easy-to-diagnose cause. To really get to the bottom of this modern observation, we actually have to jump in a time machine and go way back. Because this idea, this link between a woman's body and these kinds of symptoms, has some seriously deep historical roots.
For centuries, a lot of these unexplained issues were just slapped with one label: hysteria. And get this, the term comes directly from hystera, the Greek word for womb. So this diagnosis wasn't just a diagnosis, it was a statement that explicitly tied a woman's physical and emotional distress to her fundamental female biology. And that narrative, well, it's had a long shelf life.
And that history brings us to the absolute core question of this whole explainer. When doctors see this pattern today, are they just seeing a modern version of a very old bias? Or is there something genuinely different happening at a biological level?
So we've basically got two competing ideas here. On one hand, you have confirmation bias, the idea that maybe clinicians are just conditioned, maybe even subconsciously, to look for psychological causes in their female patients. And on the other hand, you have genuine biology, the idea that maybe, just maybe, male and female bodies are simply wired to handle stress differently from the ground up. So, to sort this all out, we're diving into a massive literature review that did all the heavy lifting. Researchers sifted through over 1,000 scientific papers to see what the collective evidence actually tells us.
All right, let's get into what they found. First up, let's talk about the body's chemical messengers, the hormones that run our internal alarm system. Okay, so when you feel stressed, your body kicks off this chain reaction called the HPA axis. You can think of it like this. Your brain spots a threat and makes an emergency call to the pituitary gland. The pituitary then pages the adrenal glands, which in turn flood your system with that famous stress hormone, cortisol. But here's the absolute key. That emergency response system doesn't activate in the exact same way or even for the same reasons in men and women.
The research shows this pretty consistently. Men tend to get their biggest cortisol spike when they're facing achievement-based stress. Think a huge exam or a high-stakes work presentation. For women, on the other hand, the system often shows greater reactivity to things like social rejection, and women also tend to report feeling more emotionally distressed during the experience.
And this isn't just about hormones. The differences go all the way up to our brains, with different wiring leading to different behaviors when we're under pressure.
Yeah, when you look at brain scans, you see that under stress, men's brains often show more activity in the prefrontal cortex. That's kind of the logical, problem-solving CEO of the brain. In women, the response is frequently stronger in the limbic system, which is the brain's emotional hub, including key areas like the amygdala.
So it really stands to reason, right? If different parts of our brains are taking the lead during the stressful moment, then our default ways of coping are probably going to look pretty different too.
And this brings us to these classic behavioral models. You've probably heard of fight or flight, that powerful instinct to either confront a threat or run from it. Well, that's more commonly seen in men. In contrast, there's the tend and befriend response, which is more frequently observed in women. This involves things like nurturing offspring and building social networks to cope. And from an evolutionary point of view, it makes total sense. While fighting or fleeing might be a great strategy for a lone individual, tending to your young and befriending the group is a powerful survival strategy for a caregiver.
So, we've seen differences in hormones, in brain activation, and in our behaviors. What does this all add up to? Well, this is where we can really start to translate smarter science into better, more effective healthcare for everyone.
So let's circle all the way back to where we started. All these patterns we see in clinics today, are they mostly the result of a lingering historical bias, or do they have a real, concrete foundation in our biology? Well, the data is actually quite clear. On a scale from 1 to 10, the scientific evidence for there being distinct neural stress patterns between the sexes is rated a strong 8 out of 10. That's not a maybe. That points to a solid scientific consensus.
And here's a direct quote from the review's conclusion, because it really says it all. The literature provides robust evidence for sex differences in stress response, spanning biological, neural, and psychological domains. In other words, this isn't just one isolated finding. It is a consistent pattern that we see across multiple systems in the body.
Now, this is a really important point. Acknowledging this biological reality does not mean that confirmation bias in medicine suddenly disappears. It can absolutely still exist and cause real harm. But it does mean we can't ignore these very real physiological differences if we're trying to provide the best possible care.
And why does this matter so much? Well, for starters, it helps explain why some stress-related disorders hit one sex harder than the other. For example, women are at a higher risk for things like depression and PTSD, while men are more prone to substance abuse. Understanding this foundation allows medicine to finally move past old stereotypes and toward truly informed, personalized care. And frankly, it empowers all of us with a better understanding of our own bodies.
So, we'll end on this thought. The science is making it crystal clear that these fundamental differences are real and they are measurable. So the next great challenge is this. How do we take this knowledge and use it to build a healthcare system that is more precise, more effective, and that truly, finally, works for everyone?